The Ancient Ones, the ones cursed by Nagash, the original nation of man. Once they ruled the whole world, but now, with their flesh stripped from their bones, they no longer feel joy, they no longer feel sadness. They're cursed to walk the plains of Nehekhara till the end of time itself. They simply slumber till those who would do wrong to Nehekhara approach, rising from the sand and lop their heads off. But how powerful are the Tombkings truly? Oh, I think the spirit of Settra just came inside of me, but Tombkings get shafted a lot in lore from not being either a good guy or a bad guy, they're more of a neutral faction. So today I'm going to be removing the plot armor from every single faction in Warhammer, including the Tombkings, and we're going to be putting them on a tier list to show how powerful are the Tombkings truly. Are they the greatest, like Settra is always claiming? Or are they just another fodder faction for the Empire to beat up on? Who's the strongest undead faction? Is it Tombkings? Is it Vampire Counts? Stay to the end to find out, guys, and let's get right into this shit. Let's go! The Bony Boys, the Tombkings. We have the Ancient One, the Tombking expert over here, Contrarian Codex. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, man. Your previous videos were a lot of very well put together entertainment, so I hope that this one will be the same.
I appreciate it so much. Now the Tombkings, in my opinion, I would put the Tombkings, honestly, originally they were going to go above Widows, but after doing the section, I personally would put Tombkings right in between Widows and Bretonnia. What do you think about that?
I think Tombkings are high B tier, maybe even low A. We can get into it.
What one are you feeling more?
I think high B. Let's stay conservative. Let's talk about their units, their armies, their strengths and weaknesses, and then we can maybe just put them into A, but we'll see. I think like Tombkings, like people know them as like the undead rulers of Nehekhara, the self-proclaimed masters of the desert, and the greatest civilization the world has ever known, at least according to them, if you ask them. They're just a bunch of dusty aristocrats all about grandeur, riches, and eternal legacy. So while they are very powerful, they do have a tendency to, let's call it, writing checks with their egos that their skeletal armies just cannot cash, and plenty times over that has cost them in some wars. But you gotta know, if you really want to assess their power, you gotta know where they came from. So they were once like this mighty human race, like the rulers of Nehekhara, and these guys rule an empire going as far north as the Southern Empire lands, and that means that after they got sort of cursed by Nagash, he poisoned a river. There's a lot of things that go into this, and you could probably make a separate lore video about this. After he poisoned the river, after he did a ritual of awakening with, by the way, honorable shout out, Skaven saved the world right there. They don't do that a lot, but they did do something nice there instead of trying to blow everything up with warpstone. So shout out my Skaven boys.
Post-production War God, I just wanted to clarify what we're talking about here. Skaven basically stopped Nagash from awakening his full power. If he would have accomplished this, he would have probably been able to take over the whole world, if not most of it, turning it into an undead wasteland.
But like this empire was huge, and when everybody died and came back, you have an entire population / army of skeletons and just the undead and constructs and everything. So you have millions upon millions, because that is how big this empire was, that will fight for
the Tombkings.
Think ancient Egypt, but death. And cranked up to 11. So giant pyramids, colossal statues, rivers of gold, and rulers who genuinely believed they were gods. So this was a place where every king spent their mortal life building bigger and bigger tombs than their predecessor, because go big or go home was practically their motto, especially for Settra. So what will be leading this, because your entire shtick with these videos is if you put one nation right next to the other, who wins? Well, we need a strong leader, we need Settra. He is the strongest leader that Tombkings have. He is also wildly inconsistent. Like one day he is super motivated to try to beat just the brakes off of everyone he can find, he can get his hands on. And the other day he can die by just a simple chaos warrior or something else. So he's wildly inconsistent, but he is the greatest general that the Tombkings have.
Hard agree. I was talking that exact point in my previous video. Settra is like one of the most inconsistent characters. How is at one point him fighting Nagash, and then he's losing to Nagash, and then he's losing to Juliet de Bretonnia? Very inconsistent, but he's got all those titles for a reason.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that is pretty funny is that in an all-out war, if you pin the Tombkings against Chaos specifically, they will overperform. And why will they overperform? Because in an all-out war, for Settra specifically, if he's leading the guys, this guy has a vendetta against Chaos. Because one of my favorite stories with Settra is just that the Chaos gods, they looked at this guy, powerful undead lord, and were like, we we could make use of this guy. So they wanted to sort of seduce him or recruit him to serve chaos, basically. And his reaction, just chef's kiss, Settra energy. He said, and I paraphrase, immortality, already got it. Strength, look at these bones. Perfection, as for conquering the world, already his plan. So basically what he said is, if you have anything to offer, kneel before Settra the Imperishable, and maybe I will consider it. So this undead skeleton king, cursed by undeath, trapped in a desert wasteland, demanded that the literal chaos gods serve him. So not ally with him, not share power, no. Serve Settra and he might consider helping you. And it's just, to this day, like, Settra holds one of the most legendary Warhammer Crush matches against Chaos in just the entire lore. It's not about defeating Chaos, it's about humiliating them. Every time his armies clash with Chaos forces, he fights with the determination of someone who has been ghosted by a job recruiter and now really wants to prove that they missed out on not hiring him.
Yeah, that's one of the things I find weird. In Total War Warhammer 3, it's very weird because Tombkings for some reason can't confederate in that game, which to me makes no sense, and hearing what you're saying makes no sense. So Settra would pretty much lead the Tombkings. There wouldn't be too much issue with that as opposed to the game, you'd say?
Yeah, especially like if you look at the lore, like when everybody was woken up, there were like these glyphs, these special magic artifacts that kind of kept Settra sealed after his death. And the moment like everybody started infighting, because what happens if you resurrect 100 Tombkings? They're all gonna feel like they are the big dog, they're the top dog, they want to subjugate everyone. They want to be the one to lead. And then they woke up Settra, and he basically just kicked the ass of everyone until they were like, okay, dude, just, okay, chill. Just you take your thing, and we'll help you. Stop beating the shit out of each other, please. But that is one of their weaknesses. Like, even under the rule of Settra, and in this hypothetical situation, they would help each other, but it wouldn't be the first time that all these Tombkings armies, they just banded together against a common enemy. In my example, it would be the battle against Nehekhara and the battle of the Black Pyramid. It's basically where like 7 or 8 Tombkings armies, they came together. And just when they were winning, like these separate Tombkings, even Settra was there as well, so this example could be relevant for your hypothetical war scenario as well. But like, they just started infighting. They all wanted the honor. They all wanted to say, okay, yeah, I did this, and it just becomes a massive like bone measuring contest. And then they can be kind of prone to just start killing each other. And that's kind of ironic because they're undead, but if their egos get in the way of the common war goal, it can get messy.
When talking about Tombkings, I find it hard to not compare them to the Vampire Counts. They're the both two biggest undead factions in the setting. Vampire Coast is there, but they're pretty much irrelevant. Sorry, Vampire Coast fans. So, how do Tombkings compare to the Vampire Counts' forces? Like, I feel like I want to know, what's better, a spearman of Tombkings or a spearman of the Vampire Counts?
I mean, I think a spearman of Tombkings, I think the skeletons are a little bit more consistent than zombies. But then again, like skeleton spearmen and just skeleton spearmen of the undead, I think it's a toss-up. If you look at the game purely, like these guys have shields, which helps them a lot. And I would say there appear to be more of them, because all of Nehekhara was, again, as I mentioned at the start, it was a huge empire, and these guys all came back. And I think that one thing that helps the Tombkings a great deal is that these guys, the skeletons, but also the constructs, these were once just mighty soldiers, and they have had millennia of experience. So it's not like if you're a vampire count in the empire, you want an army, you resurrect this random person's graveyard. They're probably not going to be too happy about it, but you resurrect this random person's graveyard, you get these guys have spears, a little bit of armor. That's all nice and dandy, but will they have the same combat experience as these skeletal legions that have been waging war for millennia? Sometimes against each other, sometimes against foreign invaders, sometimes against invaders coming from the inside. But yeah, I would say that the forces of the Tombkings will be strong, very, very strong. And let's go over the force. I think that's good. And let's start with the high priest and princess, because these guys wield a very strong magic, not just in the Warhammer games, but also in the lore. So, like, they are not just skeletons in fancy hats. They are master sorcerers, veteran commanders who have seen more battles than some races have had birthdays. So, as for the main army, as I just mentioned, their proverbial bread and butter, skeletons. In short, if you fight against a mortal race, these make up the bulk of the Tombking's armed forces, and they're just basic troops who will fight because they literally have no other choice. And hey, no worrying about pesky paychecks or keeping them nourished and well treated, because these guys are skeletons. They will do as they were told. But then, like, you're not gonna win any war if you don't have some sort of special weapons, and these guys have special weapons. So you have Necropolis Knights, you have Sphinxes, you have Ushabti, like in that order, like these giant snake riders, massive cats with sword arms, and animated warrior statues, because as the Tomb King's model, being subtle about the way you go to war is for peasants. Like, they're not about that life. They want to really kill the enemy, and they want to do it in style. And what makes these guys extra potent is not just because these Ushabti are towering statues, or these Sphinxes are the size of literal buildings with sword arms just going at you and going at your cavalry and your monsters. It's the fact that all these guys have a powerful warrior spirit attached to them. Somebody with war experience, somebody who knows about strategy, and somebody who is now able to wield what is essentially in 40k a piece of power armor. And it just makes them so much more lethal than if you would just have a mindless statue say, hey, go kill that thing over there. So I think it should be noted that, and that really puts them high B tier, low A tier for me. It's just that you're not just fighting a terror-inducing monstrosity. You're fighting a literal millennia of combat experience and strategy put into a piece of hyper armor. And with all these millennia, they've had to hone their skills to go to war. I think it really helps. And the one thing that I think pushes them over the edge for when they fight against other armies is the Casket of Souls. So basically, for those of you who play the game, or even for those of you who don't play the game, it's just a magical doomsday weapon that opens to unleash screaming laser light show level death. And how powerful is this thing? Well, I just mentioned the Battle of the Black Pyramids, right? During this bone measuring contest between the priests as well, like you had these Casket of Souls that were on a nearby hill providing covering fire. And one of these priest, while they were just bickering, trying to prove to one another who the best priest was, who the biggest bones had. It's just ridiculous. Like, these guys, their egos get in the way of everything. But I digress. One of these Casket of Souls, they misfired and they wiped out half of one of the Tomb King's armies. Half of one of the 7 armies with a single shot. Like, these things are so incredibly powerful because they shoot a laser show of these Nehekhara souls. They can not just wipe out infantry, they can hurt dragons. They can hurt very, very strong. Call any elite infantry, call any elite cavalry. These guys will do some damage. Some of the legendary cavalry or some of the legendary lords, they might not kill them outright, they might not incapacitate them, but they will do a lot of damage. So yeah, I think that's something that they need to take into account. That Casket of Souls, like, if they use it well and if it doesn't get compromised, it will win you entire battles.
Wow, that's definitely not represented properly in Warhammer the game, because they're pretty dookie in the game. They do good, you get them early in the campaign, but they're overall not that great. Because dragons in the lore, let's be clear, dragons in the lore are like crack. They're not even represented really well in the game. Dragons in lore are like insane.
Yeah, they can damage them. Like, according to the lore, these Casket of Souls, if they get a straight up hit, like that energy, all those souls, they can do damage.
Would you say it's more like a hyper beam cannon?
Yeah, it does feel like that.
Now, one thing I'm curious about the Tomb Kings is actual getting new troops. I know you said earlier that the entire race of Nehekhara obviously died, got cursed, and now they're all skeletons. But do new skeletons get created? Are the skeletons immortal? Are they actually replenishing their numbers, or are they slowly dying out? Because if every skeleton dies, then how are they getting new skeletons? That's a big thing that I think will determine Tomb King's ranking on this list.
I think with Tomb Kings, one thing you should note is that they are masters of the undead, because their mortuary cult is a big part of their lore, a big part of their culture, and they've spent millennia honing their skills, trying to preserve life, trying to extend life. That's in the end how Nagash was created. That's in the end also in part how some of these guys were resurrected. But this mortuary cult, it gives them a power to resurrect new combatants. I don't know exactly if you have all these skeletons die and they just resurrect, then it will be a little bit too overpowered. But they can resurrect, they can get new soldiers. But it also is a weak point, because with a lot of undead factions, if you kill the priest, if you can get to the Casket of Souls, if you can get to the priest, if you can get to those guys, keeping the armies animated and keeping these constructs just going and going, I think you can incapacitate their army real quick. So they will need to really do a very good job at protecting those. So I think that is one of the main weaknesses. Another weakness, as I touched on earlier, is just overconfidence. A little bit of lack of versatility as well. So they're a specialist in attrition and overwhelming power, but they struggle with adaptability. Like, they don't have gunpowder, they don't have a bunch of other special units that other races might have. And also speed. Like, these guys are slow. In a defensive war, if you, in this scenario, you put the Nehekhara Desert next to Nagaroth, for example, if you want to have a Dark Elf, a Tomb King showdown, in a defensive war, like, they don't need to be fast, even without supply chains, because of course you don't need to keep your army nourished, which helps, but like it can get very iffy very quick if you can't adequately reinforce your flanks, help another army that's like 50 kilometers down the side. So I think that's something to take into account. I think that kind of holds them back, but like their armies are huge. They have various different options they can use in battle. They have regeneration, they have very powerful magic, but they are very top heavy, and if you cut the head off the snake, it can have some impact.
That's very interesting. I'm glad you said that, because that was something I've been wondering for a while. I always did hear about the mortuary cults, and yeah, that's true. So they're basically just necromancers then?
Sort of. Yeah, they have their own. So
Okay.
like the traditional necromancer, which you would attribute to like a vampire, is a little bit different. It's kind of their own thing. Necromancers, I think, are more general, but you could view it in that vein. Like, and they have some cool characters beyond what we discussed as well. Like, we discussed this a bit off air, but Apophas, if I pronounce that correctly, very, very cool character.
The
Like
bug
this guy,
dude.
basically. Yeah, basically the undead bug dude who thought he could outsmart a death god. So basically, for the guys that don't know about this guy, like once upon a sandy time in Nehekhara, this prince named Apophas, like every other ruler of Desert Kingdom, he was ambitious, proud, a little bit full of himself, but he took things to another level. So he hated Settra and was desperate to take his throne. So unfortunately, Settra was really good at the whole being a god king thing. So Apophis decided to take a shortcut, and by shortcut I mean he made a pact with Assyrian, the Nehekhara god of the underworld. So Apophis basically promised Assyrian 1,000 souls in exchange for the power to overthrow Settra. Assyrian, being a crafty death god, accepted the offer, but instead of handing over the power, he gave Apophis the eternal curse of you played yourself. Instead of ruling Nehekhara, Apophis was turned into a walking swarm of undead scarabs, so his body melted away, leaving behind a skeletal frame that was filled with these like creepy flesh-eating insects. And his life now is just basically wandering the earth as a cursed assassin, collecting souls to repay Assyrian. Spoiler, he is never paying off that debt, but like this guy is very, very lethal. And I think that as a soul collector and a very stealthy scarab swarming assassin, and I don't know if you've ever tried to attack a swarm of scarabs, but in the lore, this one Norscan general tried to do that, and it basically doesn't work. Like, you cut off a few scarabs there, and all of a sudden, he's all up in your face. Basically, the moral of the story with Apophis is don't make deals with death gods, because he thought he was clever enough to outsmart Assyrian and ended up as the world's most horrifying pest control problem.
That always happens when you try to troll the gods with Warhammer. It's a common theme. Does not work out. One thing that's confused me a lot in the lore, and I don't know if it's just a me personal issue, is the lands of Nehekhara. Is the kingdom of Nehekhara still there, and are they like living in it? Or do they kind of just like rise out of the ground when somebody comes to mess with them or they need to do something? It's something that, I don't know if I just personally never saw it in lore, but I just don't fully understand if there's actually like a standing Nehekhara state, or they're kind of just like sleeping.
I mean, that's a very good question. I think, like, looking at the way that they go about their battles, because like this Norscan warship that I just spoke about, when it landed, they basically just saw desert. But the moment that they went further into Nehekhara, like these skeletons and these constructs just started to rise out of the sand and come out of the pyramids. So basically, because they're in bed, they don't need a functioning society. You don't need a baker, because who the hell is going to eat your bread? Who the hell is going to drink at the pub? You don't need like a functioning society. Basically, you need a functioning kingdom in the way that you have an army. So you have Settra, you have one clear leader, you have a bunch of generals. Regarding the way that they go about protecting their pyramids, yeah, I think it's more like a continued slumber and less of trying to expand, compared to when they were still a human race. That's back then, like a fully functioning society tried to expand because they are humans, and humans are inherently ambitious when it comes to, if they have power, they want to project that to the lands around them. I think looking at this, I think it's less of a functioning society and more of just like, okay, don't screw the desert. Don't go into the desert. This is Nehekhara lands, but it's more of a slumber. But when they are invaded, like in this scenario, when they need to fight any particular faction, you can be damn sure that they will rise out of the sands.
So the Tomb King's main thing is like protecting their desert lands, and the temples are still there, right? How much of, because Nehekhara used to be real and exist, how much of Nehekhara, like the buildings of Nehekhara and the temples of Nehekhara, are actually left there.
A lot of buildings just got the sands of time are a cruel mistress, and a lot of the buildings, as you can see with a lot of ruins in the real world as well, like they can get destroyed because the desert environment is not very friendly if you don't consistently make sure that these things are up and running. The pyramids were made to last. So you have some buildings left, you have the Great Pyramids left. And one thing that I will add on the building front is the Black Pyramid. It's kind of a source of great magical power, and if they can hone that well, their armies become increasingly more potent. But if like an invading force can destroy the Black Pyramid, I think you can remove a lot of Winds of Magic generation for the Tombkings armies and substantially weaken them. So like you don't have entire cities. Well, you have entire cities, but you're just like buried in sand and just you can see the age on them.
How treacherous is actually Nehekhara? Like how hot is it? Is it actually gonna be hard for armies to travel across Nehekhara? And an army will travel across Nehekhara and then the Tombkings will like pop up and ambush them? How does that exactly work?
That's a good question. I think that for this, like in the Warhammer fantasy lore, it's described as just like blistering hot. Like the thing that you have is just like with real life deficit as well, but just even hotter and even more just unforgiving for people coming in, because the sands, they kind of like fuse with the Winds of Magic. It sounds very weird, but in the game actually that's very well represented with one of the incantations you can do, like all foreign armies take attrition, and that's what you see as well. And it's just basically as if the desert is sort of alive and fighting with the Tombkings. And not just that, like you have constant sandstorms. It's not just like, oh, it's a very nice desert and you just need to bring enough water and you're going to be fine. No, they're constant, insane just sandstorms that can really choke out the life of your army. And also, after, like, why is it so hot? Like the Great Ritual of Awakening from Nagash, it made it less of a natural desert than it was before and more of like a magically cursed one. So the ritual, it drained the land of life, leaving behind like a supernatural desolation. Like even rivers and fertile lands, they just got turned into like these cursed ruins. So basically what you have, as we just discussed, you don't really have settlements, meaning you don't really have shelter. You can try to shelter in a pyramid, but then you're fighting on home ground, and you were already fighting on home ground. So if you try to invade Nehekhara, they can pop out of the sands anywhere. These tomb scorpions, these skeletons, like they are unforgiving. They will pop up anywhere. They will pop in the middle of a sandstorm. They don't care. They will mess you up. Basically because all these cities, or a lot of these cities, were reduced to rubble and you can't really step into a pyramid without getting your head chopped off by a Nushapti statue, you are faced with a treacherous and very, very deadly venture into what is not just a desert, but a desolate, cursed wasteland. And that is very difficult because what are you conquering? What are you going after? Are you going after Black Pyramids? Good luck. Are you going to destroy every pyramid they have, trying to bury the constructs? Well, you can try that. You have a lot of pyramids to go, my friends, and it's a very, very difficult endeavor. So for anyone still breathing, entering Nehekhara, probably like treasure hunters or very lost empire explorers, or in this case, other armies, it's basically a death sentence. Now, if you're not prepared, it's a death sentence. If you are prepared, it can still be a death sentence.
So you've touched on this a little bit already, but the actual magic of the Tombkings is, I don't know, it's a little weird one. I don't feel like I really understand how strong Tombking magic is, because you have characters like Nagash and Arkan, which are like super high tier magic casters, but they're obviously not really part of the Tombkings anymore. So how are the Tombkings of today's strength when it comes to magic?
I would say they're strong, but not as strong as, for example, a Geld, or like these colleges of magic that you have, or like the dragons from Grand Cafe, or even some high elf priests. Like I would say that those outclass the Tombkings in pure magical power, but most of their magical power just comes from this lore of Nehekhara, and that's basically just a mortuary cult priesthood that keeps skeletons alive. They heal their armies, they can conjure up sandstorms, they can summon reinforcements. But in terms of pure destructive damage, especially when you're out of the desert, I would say the lore of magic is low B tier. So it's integral to their army. It's very strong, but compared to some of like the other super powerful Warhammer magic that you may have become accustomed to, it is very good for them. But like just in general, I would rather have a different lore of magic if I'm going on an offensive route. So if you want to split it, in a defensive setting in Nehekhara, it's A tier. Firmly A tier. In an offensive setting, I think it's C tier.
That makes sense. Obviously, the Tombkings don't need food, water, or really anything, which is a big advantage. It's kind of like the Norska when I was talking with Nurgles. There's nothing to attack, really. And the Tombkings don't need to eat or sleep either. It's a very big advantage over a lot of these other factions. The logistics of the Tombkings, there isn't really logistics because they don't need it, but that's the best logistics you could get in the setting. And I'm really understanding why the Tombkings are so high up. I did understand that they were immortal before. The reason why I'm thinking right now is if Tombkings are above Wood Elves or not. The thing with Wood Elves is that their magic is just so cracked. Like, the characters, like maybe Settra, I think Settra's probably stronger than Orion. Orion just, I don't know, I feel like he doesn't do that much. But Ariel and like Durthu are cracked. And I just don't know if Tombkings would actually be able to deal with them because they are that cracked in lore. Like, we're talking Krokenheimer tier. Like, insane.
I get that. I think that it's definitely something that you need to take into account. But basically, compared to the Wood Elves, I think at some point it just becomes a number game.
Agreed.
And like, if you are overwhelmed by these numbers, and numbers aren't everything, right? Like, for example, there are a lot of beastmen. Like, they are not high B tier. Skaven are high up on the strength ranking, in my opinion, because they have more than just numbers. Tombkings have more than just numbers. Like, their basic strategy is simple, like throw skeletons at the problem until either the problem goes away or it runs out of the patience dealing with your waves of skeletons. If you're fighting Tombkings, it's like trying to deal with a museum exhibit that got tired of being stared at and decided to fight back. And it fights back with like a hell of a vengeance. I wonder how well the Wood Elves will deal with not just being swarmed by skeletons, but also being swarmed by just bombardments of Casket of Souls and all these constructs that are just hard as nails. And again, and I cannot stress this enough, and I think that this is the most important part of the strength ranking, that are manned by actual warrior spirits that know about strategy, know about tactic, know about how they need to fight, and they just, with the equivalent of power armor, I think these guys can do an incredible amount of damage.
You brought up the exact weakness I thought of the Wood Elves, and I agree with you 100%, because that's the exact weakness that I brought up for the Wood Elves, is that they get overwhelmed very easily. Like, even if you, let's say, Way Watchers can take out, like, probably, like, thousands of skeletons per one Way Watcher, they would just simply get overwhelmed, and they wouldn't actually be able to defend out the Lorne against so many Tombkings coming at them. And for that reason, I'm going to agree with you here and put Tombkings high B tier, maybe low A tier. We'll see where all the factions go. But I think for now, I'll leave them at high B tier, like at the tip of B tier.
Oh, I think high B tier is good. And if you're looking for subtlety, look somewhere else. Like, the Tombkings don't do subtle. They do giant statues, they do armies of skeletons, and cursed deserts. And it's very, very hard to deal with for the enemy.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on Contrarian Codex. These Tombking guys, the bony boys, they have the biggest bone in the old world, and they got a bone to pick with you. The Tombkings, they're rising up in these rankings. I definitely agree. They're pretty high. Thank you so much, Contrarian, for coming on.
Thank you. I look forward to the video.